right, in this video, let's see if we can get the collisions working. And the reason they weren't working before is because we don't have colliders on the objects, or the player and the cow. They're both going to need colliders. So what's going to happen is we're going to make the cow like a solid object, and we're going to put kind of an alarm zone around the player. So when the cow starts overlapping that zone around the car, that's when the collision event will get triggered. So how do we add those? How do we set up those type of collision events? Well, let's go to the player, and I'm going to add a component called a box collider 2D. So a box collider, if by itself, will make something solid. So let's say you have a door, you don't want the player to walk through the door, put a box collider on the door. But we don't want the car to be solid. We kind of want the car to be kind of like a zone that something can enter, right? So when the cow enters that zone, we're going to sound an alarm, right, or respond to that event. So that's called a trigger event. So what we want to do is check the little box here on the player. So when something enters that box around the player, and you can see the box right here, then we'll get notified, or our scripts will get notified that something entered that box. Now, if we run this, you'll see it still doesn't actually work. So let's run it and just verify that it doesn't work, and then we'll talk about why it doesn't work and what we have to do to the cow to actually get the trigger events to work, right? So the cow is still passing right through the car. And that's because we kind of have to make the cow a solid object. So let's click on the cow, and let's add a box collider 2D to the cow. Now, we want the cow to be solid. Like, we want kind of the not solid car to be notified of a collision with the solid cow. So we're going to leave this unchecked. And let's run this, and it's still not going to work. But let's just verify. And spacebar to change lanes. And, yep, the cow is still passing right through the car. Okay, so there's one more thing we have to add to the cow, and that's we have to add something called a rigid body to make it part of the physics system. So I'm going to click on Add Component, and I'm going to type in rigid, and let's see, we have rigid body two-dimensional, right? So click on that, and this is going to be funny. Watch this. So let me run the game here, and you'll see the cow just went falling by. So the cow is now being affected by physics, right? So it's falling due to gravity. It's building up speed, but then when it goes off the bottom, we put it back on the top, but we didn't reset its speed. So now the cow is just kind of endlessly accelerating and teleporting. How do we fix that? Well, what we need to do is make the let's go down to the gravity scale here. Let's set the gravity scale to 0, and then we'll see what that does. Let's see if that fixes our problem. I don't see any falling cows. That's good. And let's get into the other lane. There we go. So there's our collision event. And you can see that our controller respawned the player, and that our explosion actually it was destroyed. And actually, oh, that's okay. So now that what's going on here? Okay, so notice our player worked the first time, but not the second time. So what we need to do is take our player, and we need to rebuild this prefab. So I'm going to take the player, I'm going to drag it down here, back into the prefabs window. I need to rebuild this prefab. So what happened was when I changed this player object in the scene, it became out of sync with the player object that was in the prefabs folder. So now let's try it. So I should be able to, we really need some sound effects in this thing. Come on, cow. All right, there we go. Come on, cow. Boom. All right. So now when the controller respawns the car, Actually, if I pause this and I look at, see, notice here it says player clone. Now you can see if I click on the player, the cow, or the player has the Box Collider 2D and it's set to be a trigger. So when we changed the object in the scene, we had to go rebuild the prefab to make sure that those two objects stayed in sync. All right, so now we've got our collisions there. I'd say that's actually working pretty well. I think in the next video, what we'll do is we'll just get the user interface going. We'll add our canvas and our text fields, and we'll wire them up to the controller. But we are now starting to get, you know, a game that we can play. It's not a very complicated game, although it is surprisingly nerve-wracking when the car gets pretty close to the top. But all right, so next video we shall add our user interface layer.